Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about the Online Safety Act, a piece of legislation that has recently come into effect and has created a huge storm of controversy. Lots of lawsuits, lots of political pushback. The Wikipedia is suing the UK government over this piece of legislation. There's a lot of problems. And the primary reason I'm making this video is that various governments are also looking to implement similar measures, things like age verification, chat control. That is happening in the European Union, for instance. Governments are trying to control what people can and can't see on the internet. And let me be very clear. The internet certainly has been a wild west in terms of content, in terms of criminal activity. Absolutely the case, absolutely true. But the problem here is with the Online Safety Act, if the intent behind such pieces of legislation is to protect children, which is the primary purpose, and to really help deal with criminal activity, I would firmly argue that is failing in that purpose. Because it's going to make things worse. For instance, one of the parts of the Online Safety Act has to do with scanning messages online, including encrypted messages. Now, modern encryption is very good. But the problem is that it is very good, and if you then force social media platforms or apps to suddenly scan encrypted messages, you're creating vulnerabilities. There's just practical problems with that. In fact, that particular part of the legislation is not even enforced at the moment because the UK government realized it is not feasible to do so right now. They're going to try. The European Union is going to try as well. I don't think they're necessarily going to succeed, and even if they succeed, they're not necessarily going to get the result that they want. Now, let's talk about the primary purpose of this legislation, as at least a public one. It's supposed to protect children from online predators, from harmful content on their internet through things like age verification. Well, the issue is that kids will find a way. As someone who has been using the internet since I was roughly 10 years old, I've gone on some very dark corners of the internet, deep dark corners of the internet, where I wasn't supposed to, but you find a way. Or you don't find a way, but your classmate finds a way. And that's kind of the thing worth mentioning about this. Kids will have classmates. They will have friends that will show them how to get to the quote-unquote good stuff. That will show them content they're not supposed to, quote-unquote, have access to, including adult content. So if the intent is to protect children, well, it's not going to work, and it's actually going to make it worse. Because consider the aspect of age verification. What do you think kids will do? They'll get their parents, they're going to get their uncles, they're going to get their grandparents to bypass age verification. And then they'll access whatever they want to access. That is a thing that's going to happen. Or people have even been using selfies in video games, apparently, to overcome age verifications. The age verification system. So, mission failed successfully on that subject. Now, one could very strongly argue, well, if you don't want your kids to see something online that they're not supposed to, if you don't want them to access certain things on the internet, just stop them from doing so. Be a good parent. Well, it's not so easy. I would say it's not so easy on that subject. In fact, this was a discussion I had with a friend not too long ago who has kids, and what they told me is like, yeah, I can try, and then my kid goes to school, their classmates show them all this stuff or talk about this stuff, and then, I have to let my kid on TikTok, I have to let my kid play Roblox and all that kind of stuff, Fortnite, Minecraft, or else he's not going to fit in, or she's not going to fit in, and that's not a great dynamic. So I understand that perspective. But the problem is, these kind of verifications, these methods of control are going to end up failing. Now, one can argue, well, we can just go after the big social media platforms. Well, the big social media platforms will adapt. The smaller websites will just shut down, or they won't adapt. And then even if the big platforms successfully prevent kids from not seeing content they're not supposed to, then what's going to happen is smaller websites, illegal websites that are breaking the law will prop up. There's already such actions happening, respectively with regards to a lot of adult content that governments have tried to regulate. That has been happening, and since they're already breaking the law, they won't care. So kids might even see more harmful content that way in a less secure environment. Less secure because ads may have viruses on them, the websites may have viruses on them, the data you share with these websites or the data these websites collect on you is going to be used in a harmful way. And speaking about data, as someone who has been using the internet since I was very young, one of the best ways to protect a kid or anyone from harm, from becoming a victim of a scam or other harmful actions online, is to not share as much of your personal data, your real name, your age, anything that can really be linked back to you, and especially how you look, your face. But social media platforms or various platforms online, what they've been doing for years is asking for more and more information to use for their own commercial interests. In fact, this is one of the reasons YouTube got in so much trouble, because they were using information about children for their own commercial interests. And the US government basically stepped in and said, that is not okay. And they imposed restrictions on YouTube. But now you have the UK government, you have the European Union, and other governments around the world. They're not trying really to prevent social media or online platforms from getting our data and then using our data against us. In fact, what they're doing is give online platforms even more information about you. And that's going to create a lot more problems, more vulnerabilities for people, and I suspect personally that it is going to create more victims. Because again, the more information you give about yourself, real information about yourself, the higher the chance that you will be scammed, the higher the chance that someone is going to use that against you. And even if you lie and you make it up, let's say you create an account with fake information, like, you get some picture, you pass age verification, you pass the AI process, the AI algorithm, which apparently a lot of platforms are looking to do. What happens 5-10 years down the line with that account when you've built it on fake information and not legitimate information just because you wanted to pass the age verification? That's another problem on the subject. People can talk about how governments are using this as an excuse to control the internet. And again, I can understand why governments might think like that, but the problem is, and this is one of the very fundamental issues in the modern day, democracies or institutions or way of running countries has been built on certain principles. But the internet kind of broke that, because now everyone could be informed. You no longer needed to trust the institutions. So trust in institutions, trust in governments has collapsed. And we're not talking about trust in individual politicians, but in government as a whole has completely collapsed. They can't control the flow of information anymore. So they're trying to somehow wind back the clock. You are not going to succeed in that. The cat is out of the bag. The genie is out of the bottle. It's not going to go back to the way it is. And I understand the desire to reduce criminality, because like encrypted messages, for instance, right? There's a lot of criminal organizations that do make heavy use of encrypted messages for what they're doing. And it is creating real issues for law enforcement, to be certain. But the problem is, how do you fix these kind of issues without screwing over people? That is the big issue. How do you go after bad actors as opposed to everyday people that are following the law and not put them in a position where you make them more vulnerable because they're forced to reveal more about themselves? One of the things that has been very important in order to protect myself, as I've stated, is not sharing certain information, keeping certain things private. But now governments are like, yes, we're going to screw over you from a privacy standpoint. We're going to screw over a lot of people because we want to protect children. They're going to fail in their stated goal. They're going to fail in their unstated goal. And they're going to make things worse. That is my personal perspective on this. Again, I've been using the internet. I've seen a lot of things. And look, let me talk about how you bypass all of this. Because it's very, very easy in many ways. You can use, pictures, or you can have someone help you out with it. Plenty of people will. You can use VPNs. You can use Tor browsers. There's a whole list of possibilities in order to bypass these kind of filters or verifications or chat controls in order to have that privacy. But if the goal is to protect children, I'll tell you straight up, you don't want kids to end up in a situation where they're using a Tor browser or a VPN, because they're probably going to be using a free VPN or a cheap VPN. And if they're using a Tor browser, you really don't want children going on the dark web. If you think the regular internet, the one you see and the one we use, the big social media applications like Twitter, X, whatever, Facebook, online, if you think those are horrible, the dark web is a million times worse. That's when you get into really, really bad content. That should be the exact opposite of what governments should be aiming for. As I said, the genie is out of the bottle. You're not putting it back in. Corsin, signing out.